Hi there, thank you so much for joining me on this channel. As always, I'm very grateful for all your previous views, likes, subscriptions and shares. Very excited to be wearing my new Superman t-shirt, and I thought we'd look at a significant character in the Jewish faith called Joseph. The Jewish holy book, as you know, is known as the Tanakh, and it can be found, the story of Joseph, in Genesis chapters 37 to 50, if that's something you want to look up yourself. Now, some of you may have known the story of Joseph through a musical, Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat, and depending on your age, you'll know that he's been played by very famous singers known as Donny Osmond or Jason Donovan. I do vaguely remember seeing a production of this show when I was at primary school. When I was a kid, the older students did a version. I don't remember a great deal, but I do remember the role of Pharaoh, the guy being dressed as an American football player. I don't entirely know why, but it certainly worked and is the only bit of the production I actually remember. We get to Joseph through this family tree. Abraham had a covenant with God. It was a very special agreement. If the Jewish people were faithful and worshipped God, then God would give them a homeland and protect them. Abraham had a son called Isaac. Isaac had a son called Jacob. And then Jacob, who had a number of wives, had a number of children. One of those was Joseph, and he was the favourite. But why? Jacob had 4 wives, and it is believed that the reason why Joseph and subsequently Benjamin were his favourites is because Rachel was his favourite wife. As he was the favourite, Joseph got a coat of many colours, as it's been translated into modern popular culture. However, it's described as being a garment of long sleeves or a fine woolen tunic. But let's not get facts in the way of an exciting and dramatic story. It's interesting too that one of the roots of the story is how Joseph has friction with his older brothers, and sibling rivalry or stories about brothers is something which is not uncommon in the Jewish faith. You have Cain and Abel, Ishmael and Isaac, Esau and Jacob, Leah and Rachel, and so on. So even though the coat may not have been festooned with many colours, don't worry, Joseph has one more trick up his very long sleeve. He can interpret dreams, and he managed to annoy his brothers with this gift. They were incredibly jealous, particularly when he interpreted one dream which suggested that eventually all his brothers would bow down and worship him. The dream in question was of a sheaf or a bundle of wheat, and the 12 other bundles of wheat were bowing down in worship. It's also worth pointing out that Joseph's father, Jacob himself, was a dreamer and dreamed of a ladder reaching up to heaven. Now, as I was putting this together, I was poking around to find out a little bit more about what the Jewish faith says about dreams. There is a holy book known as the Talmud, and it's a collection of discussions, arguments, and debates by Jewish teachers known as rabbis. There's a lovely account of one guy who had a dream and he wanted it to be interpreted. So he went to 24 different people to try to find out what the dream meant. And guess what? He got 24 different interpretations. There's a note of caution. Yes, in the Jewish faith, God communicates through dreams. However, be careful when it comes to interpretation. His brothers were so jealous that they took Joseph and threw him down a well, and then sold him into slavery, into Egypt. Not only that, they took the coat and they smeared it with blood from an animal, and then allowed Jacob, their father, to assume it was Joseph and that he was dead. That's pretty cold. Curiously, though, you could argue that Jacob, in a sense, had sown the seeds of his son's downfall by giving him such a prestigious role in the family and that special treatment. The name Jacob actually means the one who follows the crooked path. Maybe his parental responsibility was a bit wonky. So Joseph is enslaved in Egypt, and of course it was a huge power at the time. The Pharaoh ruled with absolute authority, and the economy was based predominantly on agriculture. There was a huge, massive irrigation networks thanks to the predictable flooding of the River Nile. Now, whilst in Egypt, slaves did have an opportunity for some social mobility if they were good at their tasks. And of course, the more slaves you had as an individual, the higher your social standing. And Joseph was enslaved by an individual called Potiphar. And he, by all accounts, according to what we have, Joseph was very good at his tasks. It got to a stage, though, where he was thrown into prison. Potiphar's wife accused him of inappropriate behavior. It was completely false, and he was effectively framed, and he was sent to prison, an innocent man condemned. There isn't a dramatic jailbreak like in a Hollywood movie, though. Instead, Joseph is there in prison until he is eventually called to the presence of the Pharaoh, thanks to a former prisoner that he had successfully predicted a dream for earlier. What happened is that the Pharaoh was having strange dreams, dreams of 7 fat cows and 7 thin cows. And Joseph, with his gift given to him by God, said that effectively Egypt was going to have 7 bountiful years of grain and harvest, followed by 7 lean years of famine. And that what should happen is that effectively the kingdom of Egypt should make sure that it put away and had good stewardship of its resources to get it through those 7 years of famine. The Pharaoh was so impressed with the wisdom of Joseph that he was given a promotion to second in charge of the Egyptian empire. So here we are in the 7 years of famine. And of course, it was the whole region that was affected. And of course, the irony is that Joseph's family was starving. So his brothers travelled all the way to Egypt to ask for food. Joseph didn't reveal who he was straight away. Instead, he looked up his brother Simeon and said that you need to go away and bring me back the youngest brother, Benjamin. So he didn't exactly do the right thing straight away, but then again, he had been sold into slavery by them, so maybe he did want a little bit of, well, fun and games. But it is a joyous and happy ending because when the family return, Joseph reveals who he is. He forgives all of them, brothers, and everyone are reunited, and they are asked and invited to stay in Egypt, where the Jewish community begins to grow. As for Joseph, he dies at the ripe old age of 110 and is revered and respected so much that when Moses finally flees Egypt with the Jewish people to go to the Holy Land, the bones of Joseph are taken with them. I apologise too for the spoiler alert for the next story. Sorry. So what can be learned from the story of Joseph? Well, just a couple of things that I found out that I'd like to share with you. Yes, of course, there is that message of forgiveness, but it's worth pointing out that the word coat is translated from the Hebrew ketenet pasim, and it's a royal garment, and the same Hebrew phrase is used elsewhere in the Bible to describe robes worn by King David's daughters. So it's associated with royalty or nobility. So I suppose in a sense, when Jacob bestows and gifts Joseph this coat, you could say it's a foreshadowing, perhaps a prophecy of his eventual royal status that he has in Egypt. Another Hebrew phrase is sinat chinam, which means baseless hatred. A hatred with, if you like, no cause, or perhaps so long ago people can't remember what the initial disagreement was about. And we see that with the brothers. They get to a stage where they're unable to communicate peacefully with Joseph. And it drives them to the point where, of course, they're willing to sell him into slavery and to fake his own death and to be dishonest and disrespectful to their own father. There's also a fascinating idea about a family cycle or a cyclical nature about this story. Joseph's father, Jacob, was involved in wearing a garment to get an inheritance. He wore it to fool his father Isaac into thinking that he was in fact his older brother Esau. So there's something quite interesting about garments and this idea of the nature of events within a family lineage, a family history. And I think that's something worth considering and ruminating and reflecting on as well. That's it from me. I just hope that gave you a little insight into the story of Joseph. If you are able to like, comment and subscribe, then please do so. And thank you so much for watching. And most importantly, enjoy your learning.